The Overwatch League season 2021 has kicked off, and oh boy, was it a thrilling weekend. Plenty of preseason favorites are looking a little worse for wear as teams people had doubts about step up to the plate to deliver some wild upsets. This may have been one of the best weeks of Overwatch League games ever. Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Elias and welcome to the Overwatch League Weekly Recap. In this video, we'll be going over the matches this past weekend, partially to talk about how all the teams are faring, but mostly to see how my preseason predictions match up to reality. As such, there is a full spoiler warning for this past week's games, so if you haven't seen them, you may want to wait a bit on this video. We'll be looking at all the scores and how they match up to what I thought before the season even started. But before we begin, we do have some roster changes to talk about. And by some, I mean exactly one. The Boston Uprising has added Gabolzi, an off-tank player, to their roster from their contenders team, Uprising Academy. This is a move that probably only surprises people who thought that Boston would add Gabolzi in the offseason, but Boston didn't play this week, so it doesn't really affect too much, apart from playtime with the team. That being said, I think Gabolzi is a fantastic pickup and should make the Boston tank line look a little bit better, and we'll get to see that in action this coming week. And with that out of the way, let's move on to the scores, starting off with the correct predictions. So these are the games that I correctly predicted not only who would win, but the exact scoreline. There's not much to say about this. I think most people kind of saw these scores going about how they do. And I tend to give teams a little bit of the benefit of doubt that they're probably going to take a map off, with the exception of I didn't have much faith in the Valiant. The one big surprise here, though, is the Toronto Defiant versus Atlanta Reign game, which went Toronto's way, and I don't think many people predicted that. Certainly not on the Overwatch League desk. And my thoughts on that was I love Toronto's tank line, and I knew it was going to be a pretty close game regardless. But yeah, we'll talk about the team specifically a little bit more later, but let just be known that I got that one right. Now, moving on to these scores where I was mostly right. So these are the scores, these are the games where I predicted who would win correctly, but I didn't have the correct score line. And most of these, it was kind of predictions on taking a map or so. One of the big things is I thought Guangzhou was going to do a little bit better than they did against Shanghai and Seoul. Clearly, they got completely swept out this week. No maps at all for them. Whereas Valiant, I had originally thought they weren't going to win a map until week 7, I think. But then Chengdu did Chengdu things and proved me wrong. Or, in actuality, Valiant did pretty good. And finally, moving on to the games where I was, well, just flat out wrong. These are the games where I had the opposite team winning than what actually happened. We're going to separate this into the West and the East just for mostly space, to be honest. But in this case, I have to say the Houston Outlaws did work. Now, I kind of anticipated that the Houston-Dallas game was going to be close, but I thought that Dallas was going to take it, and in my defense, they probably could have. It was a very good game. It was a very close game. If you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. But the Gladiators kind of disappointed with their game against the Fuel. So, yeah, and won't even talk about Shock. That was an upset. That was a flat-out upset, and I'm not even going to talk about that yet. We'll talk about that later when we talk about all the teams. But, yeah, so not too bad. 3 pretty big misses in the West Division. But there's of course, more. And those additional games that I messed up were in the East Division, of course, with me getting Philly Seoul game and the Shanghai Chengdu games pretty wrong. And I don't think anybody predicted Chengdu to beat the Shanghai Dragons. Definitely not a 3-0, but it was an amazing game, and Chengdu came out and played. Now, the Seoul Philly game, I kind of anticipated Seoul and Philly being much closer than they showed to be, and I'll get into why I think that in a little bit. But yeah, I was anticipating just a complete brawl between Philly and Seoul, but with Seoul barely scraping by, that obviously didn't happen. Philly looked pretty dominant, and yeah, that's the scores for the week. Alright, now let's move on to kind of some of my thoughts from this past weekend's games. And starting off, I want to talk a little bit about the differences in meta with the East and the West divisions. First of all, the East division, they need better internet. Night one was pretty awful with the freezes, and I'm mostly joking here. I don't blame anybody for that, but because night two was a lot better. But yeah, there was a lot of problems with the internet, and I feel like I have to mention that. But one of the big things that I was noticing between the East and the East definitely likes more Ball Sigma, tank lines, and pure dives. Whereas the West is showing a lot more Rhine Rush and the so-called double bubble comps. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't overlap. Fusions was one of the few teams on the East Division that seemed to like the Rhine Rush, but we mostly saw Ball Sigma in the East and not really in the West. The other thing that I saw that was kind of a big difference is the East really liked to play Ashe, over the West Division really kind of preferred to play McCree. There was a lot more McCree play in the West than anywhere else. And I think that's just kind of, it's normal, to be honest. There is a lot of differences between kind of the Asian metas that come out. We've seen this for years. The Chinese metas loved playing different comps than the European metas or even the North American metas. So that's not a surprise. I just kind of wanted to mention all of that before we get into the teams. And starting off in the West Division, I think the most important team to talk about right now, after their performances this weekend, is the Houston Outlaws. Not only did they get... They played so many maps. They played, 11 maps, I believe, because they went 3-2 to both Dallas and the Shock, with the game against the Shock having I think it was only a single tie, draw, whatever. But yeah, so Houston Outlaws, they proved me wrong. I'll just say it that way. Their tanks look absolutely fantastic. The supports also look very decent. And something I'm going to be talking about kind of throughout this is the clutch factor. Clutch factor is something that's kind of very obvious for better teams. And things like, getting to that last fight territory and just one player just popping off and turning the entire fight. And we saw that so much from the Outlaws. They were not dominant. That is one kind of downside to them, and something to kind of look forward to in the coming weeks. But all in all, you can't deny that they were playing very good. They were playing two of the best teams, so that dominance factor, we'll see what that looks like when they play some of the weaker teams in the league. We should hopefully see them 3-0 some of the teams that are at the bottom. But yeah, Houston just looks fantastic, and their first match was against Dallas. Now, Dallas had some issues. They were definitely struggling, but the main, we know the main reason they were struggling was they do not have a hit scan player. They do not have a dedicated hit scan player, with XC retiring, which was unfortunate, but they kind of proved their strength by adapting. Now, they weren't able to defeat Houston because Houston was able to kind of adapt to their oddness, but Dallas liked to play really weird comps, and that definitely threw off teams like the Gladiators, who had a very rough first week. I didn't really see anything too glaringly wrong with the Gladiators. Nobody looked awful or anything like that. It just kind of felt like the Gladiators weren't meshing quite so well. And that's something that it's a fairly new team. It's a fairly new comp, team composition. They are mixed roster. I don't know how well English is spoken by some of the Korean players. I'm not too sure their histories off the top of my head, but just kind of, that hopefully they will start to gel, and we'll see the Gladiators actually perform well later on. I do have high hopes of the Gladiators, but after this first week, granted they played Shock first game, and Houston, no, they played, what was their other game? They played Dallas, not Houston. Dallas is also another strong team. So I had Gladiators at second. I don't know if that's going to still be a thing, but definitely I think there's potential there. And the other team that we had high hopes for, I had said in the preseason predictions that the San Francisco Shock we're going to go 16-0, but I kind of put the caveat of I don't know who's going to beat them, but I know somebody is. I didn't realize that Houston was going to prove that correct so quickly. They definitely look mortal. The Shock do not look as strong as they did last year, And I think a big reason for that is just kind of the team style and the players on it. One big thing that Shock had going for them in previous seasons was Ance. Last season, I should say. Ance was really scary, and they pocketed him so much that it was hard to get to him, and he just killed the entire other team. This season, they definitely don't have anybody stepping up to that. Don't get me wrong, none of their players look too bad. The only player specifically that I'm going to call out on Shock is FD God. And the only thing is, FD God plays very aggro. He's very aggressive, and teams are shutting that down. Houston shut him down so much. Same with Violet. Houston really attacked their backline. And, that's something that Shock can overcome. It just requires more peeling for the backline and all that kind of stuff. But definitely is a weakness of them, is their support being more aggressive than defensive. So moving on, the next team we'll talk about is the Defiant. The Toronto Defiant. Again, this is a team that I favored against Atlanta. Misspoke. I favored against Atlanta, and that was kind of a weird thing. And big reason is the tanks look strong. Michelle and Sato are both very good tanks, coming from Philly and Seoul, respectively, however I said it. But the big thing about the Defiant is some of their comps look much better than others. And especially when Neist, which is how you say his name, NA first, as I had said previously, but it's Neist, he looks fantastic on Echo. And when he's on Echo, Defiant looks overall better. They seem to like playing the double bubble Winston Zarya comps a little bit more than things like the Ryan Rush, and they definitely look a lot better for it. Now, speaking of Ryan Rush, the Atlanta Reign... Oh boy, that is a Rush team. When they can play the Ryan Rush, they look unstoppable. They might be the best team at the Rush comp in the league. And it kind of helps that their tank player, Gator, was the original Reinhardt for the GOATS comp on the team GOATS, if you didn't know that history. But unfortunately for Atlanta, they really are struggling to play anything other than that Rush. When they play dive or the double bubble, which is a form of dive, they just don't look good. They're definitely one of the weaker teams on that position. And conversely, the Florida Mayhem are quite the opposite. They are very good at the dive. OG is usually a little bit too aggressive on their team and kind of pays for that, but... one of the biggest things is Florida is looking a little bit unsure of how to approach some of the points and how exactly they want to dive in. So I hope to see that hesitancy kind of dissipate, and hopefully OGs can get some more support or maybe not go in too far so that their tank line can kind of survive a little bit longer. And I think Mayhem looked pretty good overall. The final team on the West that we need to talk about is the Vancouver Titans. I don't have much good to say about them, but to be fair, I didn't have them highly rated in the preseason to begin with. The individual players look fine. I don't think anything is too glaringly bad on the Titans, but they definitely look lost and very hesitant. Just unsure of what exactly it is they want to do, and that could just be new team trying to come together and kind of learning how to work together. That's something that, we'll see what happens later. But they're definitely on the bottom, and they did have some tough games playing Florida and Toronto. And I think people underestimate Toronto. I think they're actually a really good team. But yeah, I'm not too confident about the Vancouver Titans. They do have some good players, but it's just going to be a matter of whether or not they can work together to be at the very least a mid-tier team. And moving on to the East Division, we're going to start with the Guangzhou Charge, who was the only team in the East to not even win a map. Now, granted, the Charge had a pretty rough first week, going up against both Shanghai and Seoul, who were two teams that I kind of anticipate to be the top two teams. We'll get to them in just a moment, but the Charge definitely... They don't look awful. They don't look lost or anything like that, but they're very kind of indecisive. When they were getting picks, they weren't capitalizing on a single pick. They were very slow at almost deciding what to do, and I think that's something that should be hammered out as they work together a little bit more. Their rush comp, which they were one of the few teams that did play a rush comp, did look very weak. So hopefully we'll see some better things. One good thing for the Charge, though, Choi Se-won is absolutely spectacular on Tracer. Probably one of the best Tracer players we saw this weekend. He's definitely a bright spot for the Charge. Moving on to the other team that did not get a win this weekend, and only won one map overall, the Los Angeles Valiant. Now, I think most people kind of anticipated the Valiant not winning all that much. They definitely had some pretty bad plays. To mention specifically, you've probably seen it. I don't know when it's going to be in the clips. I'll try to get it about this time. But the Sombra Nano was just really bad. Valiant really were kind of awful at being able to adapt to what the other team's doing and to do much of anything, to be honest. One high point, though, I have to say Molaran and Shocheng were definitely high points on the Valiant, especially when they took the map off of the Chengdu Hunters. And the Chengdu Hunters, oh boy. Everybody makes jokes that the Hunters do Hunters things, Chengdu does Chengdu things, and it's impossible to predict them. And it's 100% right. And I have to say the big reason for that is just their stubbornness. They try to force, and I'm going to blame Jinmu especially on this. They try to force things that, even if they don't work, they don't really want to switch off. Jinmu never plays anything normal. He's probably the only one that played Pharah all that much, apart from I think Fleta played Pharah a little bit all weekend. But that being said, he is a very good player. So, but it's kind of a weird situation where Chengdu kind of forcing whatever they want to play, their comfort picks, is both a strength and a weakness because they are really good players. They have a lot of talent. And two of the players that I think definitely shined this weekend, especially in their defeat of Shanghai, was Gaga and Leave. Gaga was highly hyped up in the preseason as being a really great main tank, and he definitely showed it this weekend. Leave, I think, is a little bit underappreciated. He was really doing work against Shanghai especially, and looked fantastic. So overall, the Hunters are, they beat the Shanghai Dragons, which was kind of most people's perceived number one in the East, and they did it 3-0. You can't deny that. That was just sheer dominance. Now, it'll be interesting to see if teams will kind of adapt to what the Hunters like to play later on. But for right now, the Hunters are looking to be potentially the number one team in the East. And speaking of their opponents, Shanghai, Shanghai Dragons actually didn't look too bad. Apart from their loss, obviously, I think the biggest thing that Shanghai struggled with was kind of adapting to what the Hunters were throwing out. Shanghai also played Guangzhou. They did not really have any problem with that. And a lot of that difference kind of was Void. When Void is left alone and allowed to do whatever he wants, Void likes to play the Sigma, and he'll just kind of go off on a flank angle and completely wreck a team. So when teams can kind of shut Void down, I think Shanghai will look a lot weaker, but Void definitely is a fantastic player on that team. And I do have to say, I liked seeing the tank line. I don't think I saw anything too awful about Shanghai. It was just kind of they were outclassed by other teams. And let's get on to the last two teams. Speaking of being outclassed, let's start with Philly Fusion. Philly Fusion was... Oh boy, they were pretty dominant this weekend. And a lot of that reason, I think, is Carpe and Rascal. That is... I didn't really consider that they were going to play Carpe and Rascal because I kind of forget that Rascal can play a little bit of everything. I usually think of him more as a projectile DPS than anything else, but he does have a pretty strong tracer, and Carpe is as scary as ever. So that DPS duo is probably one of the best in, at the very least, the East Division. And so Philly looked strong. They did lose one map to Seoul, but I kind of considered Seoul to be the stronger team of the two, which I was definitely wrong. The only thing I'll say bad about Philly is I think Toby is probably their weakest player right now. And obviously, Toby was not their first choice, wanting Funny Astro. I think if Funny Astro was in, Philly would look a lot scarier. But I don't think Toby being in is enough of a weakness to really matter all that much. I think it's going to require the other team to step up more than mistakes on Philly. And finally, moving on to the Seoul Dynasty. Oh boy. Philly, as we just kind of mentioned, one of the things about Philly is they were one of the few teams in the East that would play Rush. And one of the teams that would not touch Rush with a 10-foot pole was Seoul. They do not want to play anything but dive. They really like the Sombra dive, which is unfortunate because Seoul looks so much better when they're not playing Sombra. And it's not anything against the Sombra player Fitz. Fitz looked fine when he was on Sombra. It just didn't work. I have to say, though, when Seoul was playing against Philly, Blizzard World, if you didn't watch any of the East games and you can only watch one map, go watch Seoul versus Philly on Blizzard World. It was crazy. But other than that, Seoul definitely... I mean, they beat Guangzhou 3-0. They lost to Philly. I don't think the loss to Philly is that big of a deal. Philly is a really good team, and I kind of anticipated Philly and Seoul being pretty even. Definitely wasn't, but I think if Seoul can adapt a little bit better, I think they'll do a lot better. Fitz looked great when he wasn't playing Sombra, just because of the Sombra comp not working. And I love seeing Toyu in for the off-tank role rather than Seoul trying to force playing Gesture and Marvel at the same time. Nothing against Marvel. I wish... I kind of wonder if we'll see Marvel all that much. I think Marvel's a little bit better at certain tank roles than Gesture, but I love seeing Toyu in because he's so much better at the off-tank role than Marvel is. And yeah, that's... I really don't have too much to say about Seoul specifically, other than I think their team comp is what's killing them currently. I think they'll do better against the better teams if they can... be a little bit more adaptive and a little bit more eager to change what they're playing. And that's about it for week 1. This has been a really great week of Overwatch, and I'm personally looking forward to week 2, as we'll get to see some of the other teams in the league and see how they measure up. Remember that we'll be doing weekly recaps on Wednesday, so don't miss out on that. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye!